It's been 2.5 weeks. Why haven't we heard anything from Harrison Ingram yet?
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Monday, April 15th, 2024, tax day. Make sure that you get to that post office if you haven't yet. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and you're joining us at the place to get your Tar Heels content every day. Thanks for making us your first listener or watch. I want to give a special shout out to all of you everydayers out there, as well as the Locked On Tar Heels Discord community. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job right now at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Today, coming up on the show, we are going to try to look at what's going on that we've literally heard nothing from Harrison Ingram and frankly, RJ Davis for that matter. Want to take a look at, though, if Harrison Ingram is out, how might Carolina replace him in the lineup? We'll talk about that. And then have a whole other host of weekend whip around stuff. The baseball team is rolling right now for the Tar Heels, and just some updates on a few other transfer portal targets as well. So that's Monday for you. Let's get right in to Harrison Ingram. Look, Harrison and RJ, for that matter, hasn't mentioned anything publicly yet about plans. There's no I'm returning. There's no I'm testing the NBA draft. There's no I'm definitely going into the NBA draft and not coming back. There's no I'm transferring. Nothing. And I got to tell you, Tar Heel Nation is getting a little antsy and a little stressed. I have heard and seen no end of messages wondering what's going on. When will we hear something? Why haven't we heard anything? It's been 2.5 weeks since Carolina lost to Alabama and nothing. And I get that. It's tough, especially coming, after you think back to last year when the season ended. Pretty quickly, news and information came out on either side, whether it was somebody entering the transfer portal, whether it was somebody announcing they were coming back, whatever it was, it all came pretty quick. So today what I want to do is speak specifically to the Harrison Ingram side of things, just talk about some things that have happened recently. And so we're going to hone in on him. On Friday, I mentioned this in passing, but clearly we need to spend more time on today because things got a little more wild over the weekend. Here's what happened. On Thursday, Harrison Ingram posts a season recap video from this year to his Instagram with the caption and the motto still the same, year 3 green check mark. And then on Friday, he posted that exact same video to Twitter, but it just said year 3 with the check mark. Well, here's what happened. A lot of people didn't read that caption either on either social media platform, and just started making assumptions about what it meant, that it was an I'm coming back video. That's where people ran with it immediately. But had people read the caption, they would have read year 3, and they would probably remember, oh, Harrison Ingram played not 1, but 2 years at Stanford and has now played a 3rd year at Carolina. It's just a highlight video. That's all this thing was. Now, to be fair, to a lot of people out there, I think if another word or two from Harrison in his caption would have helped, something like year 3 highlights, year 3 look back, whatever it had been, that would have been really helpful. However, you still got to read. You still got to pay attention. We can't just assume this is an I'm back type video. And unfortunately, one of the people that got caught up in this is RL Bynum from Tar Heel Tribune. Now, I like RL a lot. He's a great guy, does a great job covering Carolina. All in on this thing. Really, really have a lot of respect for him. He and I shared a wild few hours together in Fort Worth, Texas in 2022 as we watched Carolina take a massive lead on Baylor and let Baylor come all the way back to force overtime, and Carolina ultimately won, knocking off the defending national champs. But our seats on press row were right beside each other, and it was wild. But unfortunately, as happens to the best of us sometimes, RL was unfortunately duped by the Harrison Ingram post. Not duped because Harrison wasn't trying to be duplicitous or anything, but just, didn't catch it. And so RL posted a basically an article saying Harrison Ingram's coming back. And because RL does such a good job, a lot of people bought it. A lot of people were like, oh, Harrison Ingram's coming back. Harrison Ingram's coming back. Harrison Ingram's coming back. And I think that RL must not have seen the Instagram post on Thursday, because his article went up pretty quickly after Harrison's tweet on Friday. And it's just an unfortunate thing, because then a lot of people get like, oh, it's happening. Harrison's coming back. And he's just, not that he's not, it's just that we don't know yet. So we don't know anything about Harrison Ingram yet. Just, you got to remember that. Okay. Yeah. As for the whole, why is it taking so long with Harrison Ingram? I get the feeling that Harrison is very, very legitimately deliberating over this. Inside Carolina has reported as much, saying basically Harrison's intention was to go to the NBA after just 1 year at Carolina, but is now is weighing options, basically, is how I interpret what Inside Carolina has said. It's also been passed on to me that Inside Carolina reported that the late first round projection that you've seen in a mock draft or two about Harrison Ingram is quote unquote generous, right? Because it's one thing for that to be said by a mock draft. It's another thing if an NBA front office says he's late first round. Those are two very different entities, and one that we have to process. So now Harrison Ingram is weighing these options behind the scenes, and it leaves us as waiting to find out what's going to happen. So where I'm at right now is that because Harrison Ingram wanted to be one and done at Carolina, then for now, I would say no news is good news in terms of him returning. It's also not a terrible, obviously for next year's roster, it would hurt if Harrison Ingram's not back. But in terms of Carolina bringing in transfers and getting them off to the NBA, that is not a bad thing, right? Like long term, that's a great thing, because it's like, hey, come play for Hubert Davis, come play for the Tar Heels. And it's not a guarantee, but they can put you in a good position to get off to the league. And as you think about, though, the possibility of Harrison Ingram coming back, let's think about what makes the best teams in this day and age. It's teams that, again, get old and stay old. That's the motto. It's teams that have players that are NBA talents that perhaps could have left, but ultimately decide to come back to school. If Harrison Ingram decides to stay at Carolina for his senior year, that's what the Tar Heels have in him, along with the stability of knowing what they've got. However, on the going to the draft side of things, one thing we got to recognize is this is pretty universally looked at as a weaker draft class, the 2024 class. So one thing to keep an eye out on is this idea that since it's weaker, maybe it's an opportunity for him to go. But also, since it's weaker, there might be a bunch of other guys going in. And so he says, oh, I don't know. Or if there are a bunch of other guys that he thinks might get drafted ahead of, decide to stay because of NIL or whatever it is, then maybe he goes, right? Like there's all of these possible scenarios. And we could guess and estimate and do all that to death, and we'd be ultimately wrong because we just don't know. We might even get it right, but have arrived there by the wrong path, and then your math teacher doesn't give you full credit because you got there the wrong way. You know what I mean? It's like that kind of thing. So we just continue to wait and see. There, In terms of mock drafts, I've seen him as high as 27th. That's at Bleacher Report's mock draft from Jonathan Wasserman. He's been there for a while now on the Bleacher Report mock draft, but that had been the only one I'd seen first round. But I've seen another one now from The Score where Harrison Ingram was 29th. But outside of that, I mean, 43rd at The Ringer, 49th at NBADraft.net, 71st at NBA Draft Room. ESPN, USA Today, and CBS's, all three of their latest is just a first-round mock, and he's not in any of those. So I think just something we need to keep in mind is it's like that thing of if you get 500 compliments and one critique, a lot of times our brains go to the critique because it's the bad one, the negative, our worst fear. The majority of mock draft information doesn't have Harrison Ingram in the first round. But because it's where I think most of our brains don't want to happen, that's what we dwell on. Oh, he's a late first rounder. Well, maybe in one mock draft that's reputable, and keep that in mind too. It's about what are reputable mock drafts and what aren't. All of these things matter. And ultimately, we're gonna have to wait because despite all the projections, ultimately what truly matters is NBA front offices. And so if Harrison Ingram can get a promise from a front office that where he's just the right fit for them and what they do, I think he's got to go. But he's not going to find that out unless he gets into the NBA draft. And if he's not preparing for that right now, he's going to get left behind because other guys are out there doing that right now. So whatever it is, for his own good or for Carolina's own good, I think Harrison Ingram needs to come out and make some decision soon. But until then, we wait. Now, as for us, we will all be waiting. And if Harrison Ingram's back, great. If he's not, Tar Heels can't get caught waiting around. They need to have Harrison Ingram insurance. I've got a player that I think might be just that, and I'd love to share him with you coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about LinkedIn, when you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. So why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs, which has the tools to help find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. Thankfully, LinkedIn isn't just another job board. They help you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't even actively searching for a new job, but they might be open to that perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire a professional like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Once again, that's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. The hope for North Carolina for 2024-25 is that Harrison Ingram comes back to school and Carolina's roster has some consistency from this previous season. But if Harrison Ingram should leave, North Carolina doesn't want to get caught waiting around hoping that Harrison Ingram's going to leave and then they don't have any insurance behind him. Now, with some of the positions of need for Carolina this season, this offseason, I should say, you go ahead and you go out and you work at securing who that might be. Specifically for me, that is at the center position, the 5, because Armando Bacot's gone. And clearly, Carolina is looking at all sorts of leads there, as we've talked about. Another position I think Carolina should go ahead and be very, very actively looking to get someone in is at the 3 position. Obviously, again, there are people on the roster currently that might fit that role. But if you can get a dead-eye sharpshooter like a Cade Tyson that we've talked about, that's who you want to go procure. The positions, though, where you might need somebody, but you don't know, are shooting guard, the 2, and power forward, the 4. Why? Because Carolina's still waiting to see if they're going to have back RJ Davis and or Harrison Ingram. In both of those scenarios, you really want to start putting out some feelers in the transfer portal because if they're not back, we need a dude, right? So today, obviously, we're talking about Harrison Ingram. So I'd like to present to you an option that's Harrison Ingram insurance in the event that he doesn't return to Carolina next year. Per Inside Carolina, quote, UNC has done legwork on Kentucky transfer Adou Thiero, and multiple sources believe UNC would be in great position there if Ingram leaves, end quote. So, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. Adou Thiero, whom we saw up close and personal last year and blocked Carolina 4 times. If you can't beat him, have him join you. So Adou Thiero, listed on Kentucky's roster last year at 6'8", 222 pounds. For reference, Harrison Ingram, who we're comparing him with, was listed last year on Carolina's roster, 6'7", 225. So literally just right in that same ballpark. Thiero just finished his sophomore year at Kentucky. Obviously part of the classes now that do not have COVID eligibility. So he has 2 years left remaining of college eligibility. Some stats from this past year, just to kind of catch up on what he has done. 25 games played, started 19 of them, 21.4 minutes a game, 7.2 points, 5 rebounds, just over an assist, just over a block, and 31.8% from 3 on 0.9 attempts a game. Great free throw shooter, 80%, 2.2 attempts a game, and was really good from 2, 52.7% there. So does a lot of things really well. You'd like to see that 3-point percentage and volume come up some to kind of get to where Harrison was. But let's keep in mind, Harrison's 3-point percentage coming into Carolina wasn't that great last year either. I will say, as somebody that watches a whole lot of college basketball, because of not only my role here on Locked On Tar Heels, but also Locked On College Basketball, I saw Kentucky play a lot this year. And so I saw Adou Thiero a lot this year. Similar to Harrison Ingram, to me, Adou Thiero does a lot of winning things for his team. If they need some scoring, he'll do that. If it's rebounding, block shots, getting out in transit, whatever it is, Adou Thiero is the kind of guy that's willing to go out and just make it happen. And it's interesting to me as you look at him and what he projects to be, all these kind of things. His freshman year, Thiero didn't play a ton for Kentucky. And so I kind of even thought like he might have left after his freshman year, especially with the freshman class coming in that it was at Kentucky, a wildly heralded incoming freshman class, plus all these 7-footers. And it's like, where's Thiero going to fit for Kentucky in 23-24? Is he going to play some 3? Will he play some 4? We don't know. But given what they had on their rosters, like I just don't know. And the other thing with Thiero is that he's not a stereotypical Kentucky 5-star guy. Depending on what recruiting site you looked at, he was either a 3 or 4-star player. Typically a guy you look at Kentucky and's like, oh, why are you going to Kentucky? You're never going to see the floor. But this dude was out there a lot last year. I love that. It's not just and this is not intended as a slight to other Kentucky players, but it's a dude that's had to work really hard to find that time in the Kentucky roster. A little bit of nitty gritty on what he does at the rim. He finishes, is 55% field goal percentage at the rim. 68% of his field goal attempts come from there. So just north of 2/3. I like that. It means he's attacking, getting into the rim, and finishing there. An interesting other strength, you think about Harrison Ingram this year as kind of a small ball 4. Again, Thiero would be that same mold. Had a 5.3% block rate this year. You might recall he had 4 of them against Carolina alone. That was the 6th best block rate in the entire SEC last year. And he did that as a 6'8" guy. That tells you a lot. I like his ability to get out in transition. Very efficient there. Just over 1.2 points per possession. He has extremely high-level athleticism, great defensive skills. There's a lot that he could bring. Again, just does a lot of winning things. He's not going to blow you away when you look at his stats. And someone's like, wow, this dude's pouring in 16 points a game, 40% from outside. No, but there's so many varieties of things that he does well. And again, in comparing him to, could he step in and do what Harrison Ingram did last year? Similar to Harrison Ingram, there's some good NBA draft upside for Thiero. For me, a great year in a new place puts him in really potentially strong first round discussion for the 2025 NBA draft. An area of difference, though, I think, from Harrison Ingram is Thiero, and go watch his tape if you don't believe me, is a more athletic, more above the rim version of Harrison Ingram. And there are things that Harrison does better than Thiero as well. But in terms of athleticism, which is an area Carolina's always looking to get more athletic, faster, run, all that, Thiero brings that to the table, and I love that possibility. Also, there have been some key moments last year where some of his biggest games were against some of the biggest teams. Against Kansas, 16 points, 13 rebounds. That was at a point in the season, though, to be fair, before Big Zvonimir Ivisic came in, when I think Ugana Onyenso was still hurt, another one of their 7-footers, but also had a really big game when they played Gonzaga back in February. And so Thiero doesn't shy away from the moment, isn't, a guy that some guys disappear in big games, not Thiero. I love it. In terms of his shot, we talked about his 3-point shooting. It looks like he is coming pretty low. Maybe there's a little bit of a hitch sometime, but the mechanics overall look pretty good to me. The ball seems to come out of his hand well. I think the 3-point, the capability from the 3-point line can be strong. Now, with everything I like about Thiero, it is important for us to catch this. He has declared for the NBA draft this year and kept open the possibility of returning to school. So why are we talking about him? Well, first off, remember I quoted off the top from Inside Carolina, Carolina's made contact with him. So it's important for us to know who Carolina's talking to and what they might bring to the table. But also, I think ultimately Thiero comes back to school this year, despite the fact that it is a bit of a weaker draft, as we talk about. I think there's more for him to show at the collegiate level and then try for next year. So I ultimately think he'll come back. As for declaring for the draft and leaving open the potential of coming back and being in the transfer portal, he did that before John Calipari left Kentucky. So something to just be aware of is now that Kentucky has hired their new coach, Mark Pope, is there the potential for him to return to Kentucky next year? Absolutely. Absolutely there is. In fact, my understanding is that Mark Pope is meeting with Big Zvonimir Ivisic, who we just talked about, on Monday morning, today, immediately after his press conference. Thiero posted something of like a UK logo, I think probably from their locker room or something, right after that press conference. Doesn't say anything, it doesn't say a lot, it doesn't say a little, it might say nothing, but just something to have noted. His direct quote was, "While I'm declaring for the draft while keeping all of my options open, including a return to Kentucky." So that is very much on the table. And while, as we've said, Carolina might be in good position with him if it comes to that, it's also worth noting that there are a ton of schools who have contacted him and want to reach out. So just be aware of all of those things. I want to give you the whole context of what's going on. But even though there's a bunch of schools, Thiero should take a good look at what Harrison Ingram was for Carolina this past year. And if I'm him, I would be going bug-eyed and goo-goo gaga over the potential of that role where I would be featured in a lot of ways. Because at Kentucky, he probably still would not be, because who knows what Mark Pope's roster is going to look like next year. But the role at Carolina, he's seen it, he knows what it is, and he can go do it. So I really like what Harrison Ingram did for Carolina last year. It's a great role, and I hope he reprises it because I love him as a Tar Heel, love what he brings to the table. But if not, I do like Adou, and I think Thiero could come in and do a great job for Carolina. So we'll keep our eyes on it. Now, we've got other transfer portal people that Carolina's been looking at and a new update plus weekend whip around. We got all that coming up for you in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every one of those. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. So you can bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. We just talked about Kentucky some and John Calipari. How about this? FanDuel right now already has some Calipari specials ahead of next year. 4 different betting options for when Kentucky and Arkansas play, whether UK will win or lose at Rupp, and whether they will win or lose at Bud Walton Arena where Arkansas plays. Wild stuff. I love it. So go check that out. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Obviously, today we've been focusing in on Harrison Ingram's potential return or not, and what Carolina might do if he does not return. Obviously, though, there are also multiple other guys we've been looking at and talking about, discussing, and so I just want to update you on a couple of them. First, a new person to be on the lookout for, Sherelle McMillan from Inside Carolina, reported that a Carolina assistant has reached out to Jonas Adou from Tennessee, who entered the transfer portal over the weekend. And so we're going to talk more on that. I want to just unpack him more for you on Tuesday's show, because we've talked about so many of those other centers or bigs that Carolina is looking at and choosing from. And so we need to do the same with Adou. Also, speaking of those big guys, Umar Ballo on Friday picked up a crystal ball to Indiana. So we'll keep our eye on that if he might wind up there. They did a great job with Kalel Ware as their big this year. Ballo's a bit of a different big, but we'll watch that. Jordan Pope, who Carolina has been talking to out of Oregon State, seemingly, we talked about Harrison Ingram insurance. I think Pope is RJ Davis insurance. So Pope is visiting a couple Texas schools this week. Actually the University of Texas on Tuesday and Texas A&M on Thursday. So wanting to go to the SEC apparently, right? Remember that? Texas and Oklahoma are joining the SEC this year. A couple Carolina transfer things. James Okonkwo is committing to Akron. That's where he'll play. Interestingly, one of his former West Virginia teammates is also going there. Nothing on Seth yet, and Seth Trimble, and where he will ultimately transfer. So we'll keep our eyes on that. Weekend whip around. There's a lot of Carolina action that happened this weekend, including a birthday. Happy birthday to Trudy Weeks. Her birthday was on Saturday, and Trudy, just want to say I hope it was a great birthday for you and that you and Terry were able to celebrate really well. All right, let's start on the Diamond, because the Diamond Heels are rolling. What a year they are having. They hosted Notre Dame this weekend, but were not very kind hosts, swept the Irish. Friday was 13-0, Saturday 7-2, and Sunday 10-3. The Tar Heels are now 29-7 overall, 23-0 at the Bosch this year, 14-4 in ACC play. They're now 2.5 games ahead of Virginia Tech in the Coastal Division. So, man, these guys are absolutely doing it, and can't wait to keep track of baseball going forward as well. Softball was at Pitt this weekend. They split a doubleheader on Saturday, winning the first one 7-2, losing the second game 2-8, but then won the series and the rubber match on Sunday 8-1. So pretty comfortably there. The tennis teams both finished up the regular season this weekend. Women's tennis won twice at Louisville on Friday 4-0. Love those Skunks. And at Notre Dame on Sunday 5-2. So obviously that was the regular season finale. The women are the 1 seed in the ACC tournament. On Friday, they will play the winner of Wake and Duke at 3:30 in the quarterfinals. A win would pit them against, most likely, NC State on Friday, who, by the way, is their lone conference loss of the season. So some revenge on the brain for the Tar Heels. You might recall last year, their lone loss of the entire season was in the ACC tournament championship to NC State. So we'll watch that. Men's tennis lost, unfortunately, twice this weekend at number 16 NC State on Friday. Got skunked 4-0. And then on Sunday at number 6 Wake, that was also 4-0. The men are the 5 seed in the ACC championships. They open play Thursday at 10 a.m. against the winner of Miami and Boston College. Both lacrosse teams were in action. The women won at Pitt on Saturday 16-9, but the men unfortunately lost at home to Syracuse on Saturday, just 9-10. You hate those ones. Track had the Duke Invitational this weekend. Successful weekend kind of all around, including Ethan Strand and Parker Wolf finishing number 1 and 2 in the 1500 meter. They now rank number 1 and 2 nationally in that event, and those teams secured them spots at the Olympic qualifier in June. Remember, the Olympics are this weekend in Paris, or this summer in Paris. So keep your eyes on that. Women's rowing. We don't often talk about rowing, but they were at the George Washington Invitational this weekend. Each Tar Heel boat picked up a win, and the Varsity 8 claimed the Class of 2006 Cup. I must admit, I don't claim to know much of what that means, but I know it's a good thing. Way to go, women's rowing. Friends, that's it for today's episode of Locked On Tar Heels. Great to be back together to kick off another new week. I know we're thick in the middle of kind of free agency, and I'll keep you coming and updated with all of that information as we learn more and more and more. If you're not subscribed to the Locked On Tar Heels Discord community, we'd love to have you. The link is in the show notes. It's free to join. If you're not subscribed on video and audio, very easy to do that. Just subscribe on your favorite audio platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, just hit subscribe right down there at the bottom of the screen. It's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. We'll talk again tomorrow. But until then, peace.